Katie, Matt's little boy, our beautiful little Nicholas. Katie Wilkinson put down the diary, signed, and took a deep breath. Her throat felt raw and sore. She ran her fingers through Genevieve's soft gray fur, and the cat purred gently. She blew her nose into a tissue. She hadn't been ready for this. She definitely hadn't been ready for Suzanne or Nicholas, and especially not Nicholas, Suzanne, and Matt. This is so crazy and so bad, Ginny, she said to her cat. I've gotten myself into such a mess. God, what a disaster. Katie got up and wandered around her apartment. She had always been so proud of it. She had done much of the work herself, and liked nothing better than to throw on a t shirt, cut offs, and work boots, then build and hang her own cabinets and bookcases. Her place was filled with authentic antique pine, old hook rugs, small watercolors like the one of the side bridge just south of Ashborough. Her grandmother's jelly cabinet was in her study, and the interior planks still held the aroma of homemade molasses and jellies. Several vellum paged, hand sewn board books were displayed in the jelly cabinet. Katie had made them herself. She'd learned bookbinding at the Penland School of Crafts in North Carolina. There was a phrase she loved and also lived by: hands to work, hearts to God. She had so many questions right now, but no one to answer them. No, that wasn't completely true, was it? She had the diary. Suzanne. She liked her. Damn it, she liked Suzanne. She hadn't wanted to, but there it was. Under different circumstances, they might have been friends. She had friends like Suzanne in New York and back home in North Carolina. Lori, Robin, Susan, Gilda, Lynn. Lots of really good friends. Suzanne had been gutsy and brave to get out of Boston and move to Martha's Vineyard. She had chased her dream to be the kind of doctor, the kind of woman she needed to be. She had learned from her near fatal heart attack. She'd learned to treasure every moment as a gift. And what about Matt? What had Katie meant to him? Was she just another woman in a doomed affair? God, she felt as if she should be wearing the scarlet letter. Suddenly, she was ashamed. Her father used to ask her a question all the time when she was growing up. Are you right with God, Katie? She wasn't sure now. She didn't know if she was right with anyone. She had never felt that way before, and she didn't like it. Jerk, she whispered. You creep. Not you, Genevieve. I'm talking about Matt. Damn him. Why didn't he just tell her the truth? Had he been cheating on his perfect wife? Why hadn't he wanted to talk about Suzanne or Nicholas? How could she have allowed Matt to seal off his past from her? She hadn't pushed as much as she could have. Why? Because it wasn't her style to be pushy. Because she didn't like being pushed herself. She certainly didn't like confrontations. But the most compelling reason had been the look in Matt's eyes whenever they started to talk about his past. There was such sadness, but also intimidation intimidations of anger, and Matt had sworn to her that he was no longer married. Katie kept remembering the horrible night Matt left her. She was still trying to make sense of it. Had she been a fool to trust someone she thought she loved? On the night of July 18th, she had prepared a special dinner. She was a good cook, though she seldom had to do this kind of elaborate affair. She set the wrought iron table on her small terrace with her beautiful Royal Crown Derby china and her grandmother's silver. She bought a dozen roses, a mixture of red and white. She had Tony Braxton, Anita Baker, Whitney, and Eric Clapton on the CD player. When Matt arrived, she had the best, the most wonderful surprise waiting for him. It was really great. The first copy of the book of poems he'd written, which she had edited at the publishing house where she worked. It had been a labor of love. She also gave him the news that the printing was 11,500 copies, very large for a collection of poems. You're on your way. Don't forget your friends when you get to the top, she said. Less than an hour later, Katie found herself in tears, shaking all over and feeling as if she were living a horrible nightmare that couldn't possibly be real. Matt had barely come in the door when she knew something was wrong. She could see it in his eyes, hear it in the tone of his voice. Matt had finally told her, Katie, I have to break this off. I can't see you again. I won't be coming to New York anymore. I know how awful that sounds, how unexpected. I'm sorry. I had to tell you in person. That's why I came here tonight. No. He had no idea how awful it sounded, or was. Her heart was broken. It still was broken. She had trusted him. She'd let herself be completely open to hurt. She'd never done that before. And she had wanted to talk to him that night. She'd had important things to tell him. Katie just never got the chance. After he left her apartment, she opened a drawer in the antique dresser near the door leading to the terrace. There was another present for Matt hidden inside, a special present. Katie held it in her hand, and she began to shake again. Her lips quivered. Then her teeth started to chatter. She couldn't help herself, couldn't make it stop. She pulled away the wrapping paper and the ribbon, and then she opened the small oblong box. Oh, God. Katie started to cry as she peered inside. The tears streamed from her eyes. The hurt she felt almost wasn't bearable. She'd had something so important and so wonderful to share with Matt that night. Inside the box was a beautiful silver baby rattle. She was pregnant. The diary. Nicholas. This is the rhyme of my life, and as it is as regular and comforting as the Atlantic tides I see from the house, it is so natural and good and right. I know in my heart that this is where I am supposed to be. I get up at 6 and take Gus for a long romp down past the Rowe farm. It opens to a field of ponies, which Gus regards with a certain laissez faire. I think he believes they're giant golden retrievers. We eventually come out to a stretch of beach rimmed with 8 and 10 foot high dunes and waving seagrass. Sometimes I wave back. I can be such a cook. That's that it's embarrassing. The route is somewhat varied, but usually we end up cutting through Mike Straw's property that has a lane of noble oaks. If it's hot or raining, the old trees act as a canopy. Gus seems to like this time of the day almost as much as I do. What I especially like about the walks is the peaceful, easy feeling I have inside. I think a lot of it is due to the fact that I've taken my life back, reclaimed myself. Remember the 5 balls, Nicky. Always remember the 5 balls. That is my exact thought as I start down the long road that leads home. Just before I turn in my driveway, I pass the Bone house next door. Melanie Bone was amazingly gracious and generous when I first moved in, supplying me with everything from helpful phone numbers to hammers, nails, paint, use of her phone, and cold, tangy lemonade, depending on the requirement. In fact, that's how I got my house painter's number. Melanie recommended Picasso to me. She is my age and already has 4 kids. God love her. I'm always in awe of anybody who can do all that. All mothers are amazing. Just keeping extracurricular activities straight is like trying to run Camp Kippawa. Melanie is small, just a little over 5 feet, with jet black hair and the loveliest, most welcoming smile. Did I mention that the Bone kids are all girls? Ages 1 through 4. I've always been bad with names, so I keep them organized by calling them by their ages. Is 2 sleeping? Is that 4 outside on the swings? I think this will fit 3. The Bones all giggle when I do this, and they think it's so silly. They've inducted Gus as an honorary number 5. Lord, if anyone ever overheard my system, they'd never come to see Dr. Bedford. But they do come, Nicky, and I heal, and I am healing myself. Now, listen to what happens next. I had another date with Matt. I was invited to a party at his house. My little man. The house outside Vineyard Haven was beautiful, tasteful, impressive, and very expensive. I couldn't help but be impressed. As I looked around, the men and the women, even the children, arranged themselves into one demographic group. Successful. It was Matt's world. It was as if the whole Upper East and West sides of Manhattan, some smatterings of the Tribeca, and all of Soho had been transplanted to the Vineyard. Party-goers were spread across the decks, the stone walkways, and the various gorgeously furnished rooms that opened to endless views of the sea. The house was definitely not me, but I could still appreciate its beauty, even the love that had gone into making it what it was. Matt took my arm and introduced me to his friends. Still, I felt out of place. I don't know exactly why. I had attended more than my share of events like this in Boston. Ribbon cuttings for new hospital wings, large and small cocktail soirees, the endless invitations to whatever was newsworthy in Boston. But I really felt uncomfortable, and I didn't want to tell Matt, to spoil the night for him. My recent stint on Martha's Vineyard had been more down home. growing vegetables, hanging shutters, waterproofing porch floors. At one crazy point, I actually looked down to see if I'd gotten all the white paint off my hands before I came. You know what it was like, Nick? Sometimes, when we hang together and it's just the two of us, I'll talk Nicky talk with you. That's the special language of made up words, strange, funny noises, and other indecipherable codes and signals that only the two of us understand. Then an adult will come to the door, or we'll have to go out to the market for something, and I swear I forget how to talk like an adult. That's how I felt at this party. I'd spent too much time in work boots and paint stained overalls. I was out of sync, and I liked the new rhythm I was creating for myself. Easy, simple, uncomplicated. As I floated through a pleasant enough haze of witty small talk and clinking glass, a little voice, a child's voice, broke through to me. A small boy came running up, crying. He was probably 3 or 4. I didn't see a parent or a nanny anywhere. What happened? I bent down and asked, "Are you okay, big guy?" "I fell," he sobbed. "Look." And when I looked down, sure enough, his knee had a nasty scrape. There was even a little blood. "How'd he know you were a doctor, Suzanne?" Matt asked. "Children know these things," I said. "I'll take him inside and clean his knee. This white dress is meant to be chic, but maybe it looked like a doctor's lab coat to him." I put my hand out, and the little boy reached up and took it. He told me that his name was Jack Brandon. He was the son of George and Lillian Brandon, who were at the party. He explained in a very grown up way how his nanny was sick and his parents had to bring him. As he and I emerged from the screen back door, a concerned woman came up to me. "What happened to my son?" she asked, and actually seemed put out. "Jack took a little fall. We were just going to find a band aid," Matt said. "It's not serious," I said. "Just a scratch. I'm Suzanne, by the way. Suzanne Bedford." Jack's mother acknowledged my presence with a curt nod. When she tried to take Jack's hand, he turned unexpectedly and hugged my legs. I could tell that the mother was annoyed. She turned to a friend, and I heard her say, "What the hell does she know? It's not like she's a doctor." Nick listened. Nick, listen. Watch closely now. This next part is magic. There is such a thing. Believe me. One night, after a very long day at my office, the intrepid country doctor decided to grab a bite to eat on her way home. I was just too tired to deal with making something or even deciding what to make. No, Harry's hamburger would do just fine. A burger and fries seemed perfect to end my day. I needed a little guilty pleasure. I guess it was a little past 8 when I strolled inside. I didn't notice him at first. He was sitting by the window, eating his dinner and reading a book. In fact, I was halfway through my burger when I saw him. Picasso, my house painter. I'd had very little contact with him since he left me those beautiful wildflowers in the mason jar. Occasionally, I'd hear him fixing something on the roof as I was leaving for work, or catch him painting the house, but we seldom spoke more than a few words. I got up to pay my check. I could have walked out without saying hello because his back was turned toward me, but that seemed rude, ungracious, and snobby on my part. I stopped at his table and asked him how he was. He was surprised to see me and asked if I'd join him for a cup of coffee, dessert, anything. It was his treat. I gave him a lame excuse saying I had to get home to Gus, but he was already clearing a spot for me, and I just sort of sat down in his booth by the window. I liked his voice. I hadn't noticed it before. I liked his eyes, too. "What are you reading?" I asked, feeling awkward, maybe a little scared, wanting to keep the conversation going. "Two things. Melville," he held up Moby Dick, "and Trout Fishing in America. Just in case I don't catch the big one, I have a backup." I laughed. Picasso was pretty smart and funny. "Moby Dick. Hmm. Is that your summer school reading, or a guilt hangover because you never finished it in school?" "Both," he admitted. "It's one of those things that you have on your to-do list in life. The book just sits there looking at you, saying, 'I'm not going away till you read me.' This is the summer I'm getting all the classics out of the way so I can finally concentrate on cheap summer thrillers." We talked for more than an hour that night, and the time just flew. Suddenly, I noticed how dark it was outside. I looked back at him. "I have to go. I start work early in the morning." "Me too," he said and smiled. "My current boss is an absolute slave driver." I laughed. "So I've heard." I stood up at the table, and for some goony reason I shook his hand. "Picasso," I said, I don't even know your real name. It's Matthew, he said. Matthew Harrison, your father. The next time I saw Matt Harrison, he was floating high above the world up on my roof. He was hammering shingles like a madman. Definitely a good, very conscientious worker. It was a few days after we had talked at Harry's Hamburger. Hey, Picasso, I yelled, this time feeling more relaxed and even happy to see him. You want a cold drink or something? Almost done here. I'll be down in a minute. I'd love something cold. 5 minutes later, he entered the cottage, as brown as a burnished copper coin. How's it going up there with the seagulls play? I asked. He laughed. Good and hot, believe it or not. I'm almost done with your roof. Damn, just as I was starting to like having him around. How's it going down here? Matt asked, sliding into my porch rocker in his cut-off jeans and open denim shirt. The rocker went back and bumped the trellis. Pretty good, I said. No tragic headlines in the trenches today, which is always nice to report. Actually, I love my practice. Suddenly, behind Matt, the trellis broke away from its hinges and began to tumble toward us. We both leaped up simultaneously. We managed to press the white wooden frame back into place, our heads covered with rose petals and clematis. I began laughing as I looked over at my handy man. He looked like a bridesmaid gone wrong. He immediately responded by saying, Oh, and you don't like Carmen Miranda yourself? Matt got a hammer and nails and rescued the trellis. My only job was to hold it steady. I felt his strong, very solid leg brush against mine. Then I could feel his chest press against my back as he hovered over me, banging in the last nail. I shivered. Had he done that on purpose? What was going on here? Our eyes met, and there was a flash and something bordering on the significance between us. Whatever it was, I liked it. Impulsively, or maybe instinctively, I asked him if he'd like to stay for dinner. Nothing fancy. I'll throw some steaks and corn on the grill. Like that? He hesitated, and I wondered whether there was someone else. He certainly was good looking enough, but my insecurity evaporated when he said, I'm kind of grubby, Suzanne. Would you mind if I took a shower? I'd love to stay for dinner. There are clean towels under the sink, I told him. And so he went to wash up, and I went to make dinner. It had a nice feeling to it. Regular, simple, neighborly. That's when I realized I didn't have any steak or corn. Fortunately, Matt never knew that I ran over to Melanie's for food, and that she threw in wine, candles, even half a cherry pie for dessert. She also told me that she adored Matt, that everyone did, and good for you. After dinner, the two of us sat talking on the front porch for a long time. The time flew again, and when I looked at my watch, I saw it was almost 11. I couldn't believe it. Tomorrow's a hospital day for me, I said. I have early rounds. I'd like to reciprocate, Matt said. Take you to dinner tomorrow? May I, Suzanne? I couldn't take my eyes away from his. Matt's eyes were this incredibly gentle brown. Yes, you absolutely may take me to dinner. I can't wait, I said. It just came out. He laughed. You don't have to wait. I'm still here, Suzanne. I know, and I like it, but I still can't wait for tomorrow. Good night, Matt. He leaned forward, lightly kissed my lips, and then went home. As it always has in my life. So far, anyway. Tomorrow finally arrived. It came with Gus. Every morning he goes out to the porch and fetches the Boston Globe. What a retriever. What a pal. Picasso took me around the island in his beat-up Chevy truck that afternoon, and I saw it as I never had before. I felt like a tourist. Martha's Vineyard was full of picturesque nooks and crannies and stunning views that continually surprised and delighted me. We ended up at the lovely, multicolored Gay Head Cliffs. Matt reminded me that Tashtego in Moby Dick was a native harpooner and a Gay Head Indian. I guess I'd forgotten. A couple of days later, after he'd finished some work in the house, we went for another ride. 2 days later, we went out to Chappaquiddick Island. There was a tiny sign on the beach. Please don't disturb. Not even the clams or scallops. Nice. We didn't disturb anything. I know this might sound silly, or worse, but I liked just being in the car with Matt. I looked at him and thought, hey, I'm with this guy, and he's very nice. We're out looking for an adventure. I hadn't felt like that in a long time. I missed it. It was at that very moment Matt turned and asked me what I was thinking about. Nothing, just catching the sights, I said. I felt as if I'd just been caught doing something I wasn't supposed to. He persisted. If I guess right, will you tell me? Sure. If I guess right, he said and grinned, then we have to have another date, maybe even tomorrow night. And if you guess wrong, then we never see each other again. Big stakes riding on this. He laughed. Remember, I'm still painting your house, Suzanne. You wouldn't screw up the paint job to get even. Matt pretended to be offended. I'm an artist. Picasso. He paused before winking at me, and then nailed his guess. You were thinking about us. I couldn't even bluff, though I did blush like crazy. Maybe I was. Yes, he shouted, and raised both arms in triumph. And so? So keep your hands on the steering wheel. And so what else? So what would you like to do tomorrow? I started to laugh and realized I did that a lot around him. Boy, I have no idea. I was going to give Gus a badly needed bath, do some food shopping, maybe rent a movie. I was thinking, The Prince of Tides. Sounds great. Sounds perfect. I love Pat Conroy's book, all his stuff. Never got around to the movie. Afraid they'd mess it up. If you want some company, I'd love to tag along. I had to admit, it was great fun being with Matt. He was the polar opposite of my former Boston boyfriend, Michael Bernstein, who never seemed to do anything without a logical reason, never took a day off, probably never turned down a pretty winding road just because it was there. Matt couldn't have been more different. He seemed to take an interest in just about everything on the planet. He was a gardener, bird watcher, avid reader, pretty good cook, basketball player, crossword puzzle champion, and, of course, he was very handy around the house. I remembered looking down at my watch at one point during our ride, but I wasn't doing it because I wanted our date to be over. I was doing it because I wanted it not to be over. I felt so damn happy that day, just taking a ride with him, going absolutely nowhere. I breathed in everything around me, the seagrass, the minty blue sky, the beach, the roaring ocean. But mostly I breathed in Matthew Harrison, his freshly laundered plaid flannel shirt, his jeans, his glistening rose brown skin, his longish brown hair. I breathed Matt in, held him there, and never wanted to exhale. Something very nice was happening. Now, you may be wondering about Matt Wolf, the lawyer. Well, I called Matt several times, but all I ever got was his answering machine, and then he never called me back. It is a small island, though, so maybe he knew. Nikki. I saw Matt Harrison every day for the next 2 weeks. I almost couldn't believe it. I pinched myself a lot. I smiled when no one was around. Have you ever ridden a horse, Suzanne? Matt asked me on Saturday morning. This is a serious question. I reckon, when I was a kid, I said with a light cowgirl drawl. A perfect answer, because you're about to be a kid again. Right now, today. By the way, have you ever ridden a sky blue horse that has red stripes and gold hooves? I looked at Matt and then shook my head. I'd remember if I had. I know where there's a horse like that, he said. In fact, I know where there are lots of them. We drove up to Oak Bluffs, and they were there. What a sight. Dozens of brightly painted stallions stood in a circle beneath the most dazzling jigsaw ceiling I'd ever seen. Hand carved horses with flared red nostrils and black glass eyes galloped in their tireless tracks in a circle of joy. Matthew had brought me to the Flying Horses, the oldest carousel in the country. It was still open for business, for kids of all ages. We climbed aboard as the platform tilted and rotated beneath us, and we found perfect steeds. As the music began, I clenched the silver horse rod, rising up and falling, rising and falling. I fell under the carousel's spinning spell. Matt had reached out to hold my hand, and even tried to catch a kiss, when he succeeded admirably. What a horseman! Where did you learn to ride like that, cowboy? I asked as we rode up and down, but also round and around. Oh, I've ridden for years, Matt said. Took lessons here when I was 3. You see that blue stallion up ahead? Blue the color of the sky? Wild blue yonder blue? Reckon I do. He threw me a couple of times. Man, did I take a nasty spill or two. That's why I wanted to make sure you got National Velvet first time out. She's got an even temper, lovely coat of shellac. She's beautiful, Matt. You know, when I was a kid, I did ride some. It's all coming back to me. I used to go riding with my grandfather out in Goshen, New York. Funny I should remember that now. Good memories are like charms, Nicky. Each is special. You collect them one by one until one day you look back and discover they make a long, colorful bracelet. By the end of that day, I would have my first in a series of beautiful charms about Matthew Harrison. Katie. Katie would never forget the very first time she saw Matt Harrison. It was in her small, comfortable office at the publishing house, and she had been looking forward to the meeting for days. She had loved Songs of a House Painter, which seemed to her like the most memorable short stories, quite magical, condensed into powerful, very moving poems. He wrote about everyday life, tending a garden, painting a house, burying a beloved dog, having a child. But his choice of words distilled life so perfectly. She was still amazed that she had discovered his work. And then he walked through the door of her office, and she was even more amazed. No, make that entranced. The most primitive parts of her brain and nervous system locked onto the image before her, the poet, the man. Katie felt her heart skip a beat, and she thought, my God, my, careful and careful. He was taller than she was. She guessed about 6 foot 2. He had a good nose and strong looking chin, and everything about his face held together extremely well, like one of his poems. His hair was longish, sandy brown, clean and lustrous. He had a deep working man's tan. He smiled at something, hopefully not her height or her gawkiness or the goofy look on her face, but she liked him anyway. What was there not to like? They had dinner that night, and he gallantly let her by. He did insist on picking up the tab for a couple of glasses of expensive port a little later. Then they went to a jazz club on the Upper West Side on a school night, as Katie called her work nights. He finally dropped her off at her apartment at 3 in the morning, apologized profusely and sincerely, gave her the sweetest kiss on the cheek, and then off he went in a checker cab. Katie stood on the front steps and was finally able to catch her breath. Maybe, for the first time since he had walked through the door of her office, she tried to remember. Was Matthew Harrison married? He was back in her office the following morning, to work, but the two of them skedaddled off to lunch at noon and didn't return for the rest of the day. They went museum hopping, and he certainly knew his art. He didn't show off, but he easily knew as much as Katie did. She kept thinking, who is this guy, and why am I allowing myself to feel this way? And then, why am I not trying to feel like this all the time? He came up to her place that night, and she continued to be astonished that any of this was happening. Katie was infamous with her friends for not sleeping around, for being too romantic, and way too old fashioned about sex. But here she was with this good looking, undeniably sexy house painter poet from Martha's Vineyard, and she couldn't not be with him. He never ever hustled her. In fact, he seemed almost as surprised about being in her apartment as she was that he was there. Humana, Katie said, and they both laughed nervously. My sentiments exactly, Matt said. They went to bed for the first time on that rainy night, and he made her notice the music of the raindrops as they fell on her street, the rooftop, and even the trees outside her apartment. It was beautiful. It was music. But soon they had forgotten the patter of the rain and everything else except for the urgent touch of each other. He was so natural and easy and good in bed that it scared Katie a little. It was as if he had known her for a long time. He knew how to avoid her, how and where to touch her, how to wait, and then when to let everything on the inside explode. She loved the way he touched her, the gentle way he kissed her lips, her cheeks, the hollow of her throat, her back, breasts, well, everywhere. You're absolutely ravishing, and you don't know it, do you? He whispered to her, then smiled. You have the most delicate body. Your eyes are gorgeous, and I love your braid. You and my mother, Katie said. She loosened the braid and let her long hair cascade over her shoulders. I love that look too, Matt said and winked at her. When he finally left her apartment the next morning, Katie had the feeling that she had never been with anyone like that, never experienced such intimacy with another person. My God, why not? She asked herself. She kind of missed Matt already. It was insane, completely ridiculous. Not her, but she did miss him. My God, why not? When she got to the office that morning, he was already there, waiting for her. Her heart nearly stopped. "We better do some work," she said. "Seriously, Matthew." He didn't say a word, just shut her office door and kissed her until Katy felt as if she were melting into the hardwood floor. He finally pulled away, looked into her eyes again, and said, "As soon as I left your place, I missed you."